I remember that Christmas night clearly, as if it had just happened yesterday. It was December 24th last year, when snow was falling lightly outside the window of our family villa in the suburbs of London. The Kensington Villa. The name alone exudes nobility, with its marble columns and vast garden decorated with thousands of twinkling lights. I, Lorenzo Kensington, 36 years old, walked in wearing a simple suit, no cravat, no flashy wristwatch. I didn't want to stand out, and indeed, no one paid any attention to me. The party was held extravagantly as it was every year, but this year it was even more so. My parents, Mr. Maxwell and Mrs. Eloise, had invited all sorts of guests, business partners, social friends, even the media, all to celebrate my older brother Louis Kensington's company, 38 years old, making headlines in newspapers and on television. His company, a real estate firm, had just signed a massive contract, turning him into a star in the business world. I overheard snippets from reporters loitering outside the gate. Louis Kensington, the perfect heir to the Kensington Empire. Empire, I smiled to myself. They had no idea where the real empire truly lay. As I pushed open the door and stepped inside, Christmas music echoed from the high-end speakers, blending with the lively chatter and laughter. The grand living room was decorated magnificently. A towering Christmas tree adorned with sparkling crystal ornaments, an endlessly long banquet table laden with everything from caviar to premium French wines. The guests crowded together, everyone dressed elegantly in formal attire. I slipped through the crowd, trying to find a quiet corner. My father, Mr. Maxwell, tall and imposing with his white beard, stood in the center, holding a champagne glass and laughing heartily. Our Louis has made history. The company is on television. The press can't praise him enough. This is the greatest pride of my life and my wife's. He clapped my brother Louis on the shoulder. Louis stood beside him with a triumphant smile, his shiny black tuxedo fitting perfectly over his muscular build. My mother, Mrs. Eloise, was busy moving between groups of guests, boasting endlessly. Louis is the most worthy heir. He's been brilliant since childhood. Look at him now, taking the company to new heights. We're so proud. My mother always said that, like a familiar refrain. I stood tucked into a corner, silently observing the party unfolding before me. No one offered me a glass of wine, and no one bothered to ask how I was. My seat was arranged at the edge of the banquet table, right next to the kitchen door, where the clatter of dishes drowned out both the music and the laughter. I was present there, but as if I didn't belong. Not a welcomed guest, but rather a superfluous existence in my own home. I sat there, nibbling on a piece of toasted bread, my eyes scanning the crowd. Louis was the center of attention, surrounded by partners, shaking hands warmly. He was slightly taller than me, his black hair neatly combed, his voice booming as he recounted his latest triumph. We beat every competitor. This contract will change the face of the real estate industry. The guests applauded enthusiastically. I remained silent, only nodding when someone happened to glance my way. In my mind, numbers flashed by. My investment conglomerate, operating in the shadows, had just closed a $50 million deal with international funds. But I kept it hidden. I had never used money or power to buy recognition from my parents. They thought I was just a guy doing vague service jobs, and I let them think that. Then that moment arrived. A few curious guests, perhaps new friends of Louis, turned to ask about me. A middle-aged woman wearing a sparkling diamond necklace tilted her head. "What are you doing these days, Lorenzo?" Before I could open my mouth, my father interrupted with an awkward laugh. "Oh, Lorenzo? He just does services, odd jobs. Nothing noteworthy." My mother nodded in agreement, her voice slightly shrill. "That's right, Lorenzo doesn't follow big business like Louis. He prefers a simple life." My mother's tone sounded like an excuse, but her eyes were clear. Disdain. I felt it like a light knife cut to the heart. Not the first time, but it still hurt. The atmosphere began to shift as the formal dinner started. We sat down at the table, and my parents could no longer hold back. They began comparing the two brothers right in front of everyone. Mr. Maxwell raised his glass. "Today we toast Louis, the greatest pride of the Kensington family. And Lorenzo, you should learn from your brother. At your age, you still don't have a proper career." His words echoed. The guests fell silent, a few glancing at me with pity. My mother continued, her voice sweet but sharp. "Luis has been outstanding since childhood, while Lorenzo, he's incompetent. He hasn't achieved anything, just drifting with service jobs. We're so worried about him." My heart pounded. Incompetent? No career? Those words hit me like stones thrown in my face. I gripped my water glass tightly, trying to stay calm. Luis, my older brother, didn't miss the opportunity. He turned to me with a condescending tone, as if bestowing a favor. "Little brother, I'm giving you sincere advice. Stop drifting aimlessly. At 36 and still like this, it's a failure. Let me teach you how to do business. I have experience." He laughed loudly, patting my shoulder as if patting a naughty child. The surrounding guests laughed along, but it was forced laughter. The party atmosphere became awkward and heavy. Some guests looked down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. They were afraid to offend the powerful Kensington family. I remained completely silent. No rebuttal, no explanation. I just sat there, observing every glance, every word. My father's eyes were full of pride when looking at Luis, but when they flicked to me, only disappointment. My mother smiled falsely, masking her contempt. Luis was smug, as if he was born to stand above me. In my mind, memories flooded back like an old film. From childhood to adulthood, I had always been the faint shadow behind my brother. Luis excelled in studies, was outstanding in sports, and was proudly sent to study at Harvard by my parents as a matter of course. I was different. I figured things out on my own, learned by myself, built my career without ever taking a single penny from the family. The times I brought home small achievements, they were quickly overshadowed by the familiar phrase, "Your brother did even better." The nights I stayed up building my company, no one knew and no one cared. And now, right here in the middle of this dazzling Christmas party, nothing had changed. I looked around the luxurious room, crystal chandeliers shining brilliantly, the gentle sound of violins, the delicious aroma of food. No one in this room knew the truth about me. That I, Lorenzo Kensington, am the chairman of a discreet investment conglomerate, an empire worth $350 million operating completely independently from the family. I had built it from nothing, through sleepless nights and risks that nearly led to bankruptcy. I invested in technology, underground real estate, and promising startups, all under a veil of secrecy. I deliberately kept my identity hidden, not out of fear, but because I wanted them to recognize me for who I truly am, not for money or power. But now, seeing them mock me, I wondered, is it worth it? My heart beat faster as I thought about it. Excited, not from anger, but from a decision forming in my mind. I could stand up right now, reveal everything, and leave them stunned. But no, I chose silence. The party continued, laughter echoing, toasts dedicated to Luis. I quietly stood up, left the table, and walked out the back door. No one noticed, or if they did, they didn't care. The Christmas music still played joyfully behind me, mixed with chatter and laughter. I stepped outside. Snow fell lightly on my shoulders, the cold wind piercing to the bone. A cold thought flashed through my mind. Next Christmas, things will no longer be like this. In the days that followed, I returned to my familiar life. Discreet meetings, numbers dancing across computer screens, and an empire that no one in my family knew about. I deliberately avoided contact with my parents and Luis, not out of anger, but because I needed space to breathe. Every morning I woke up at 5 a.m., went jogging around the quiet neighborhood in the suburbs of London, inhaling the cold air to dispel the lingering insults. Incompetent, no career. Those words were like scratches on the skin, not bleeding, but aching persistently. I reminded myself, they know nothing. And perhaps it was time they did. Then the news appeared quietly but heavily like a time bomb. In early January, the British government announced a national-scale smart urban infrastructure project, encompassing transportation, renewable energy, and integrated urban management systems. The total value of the project was estimated to exceed £1 billion, to be implemented in multiple phases over more than 10 years, with public bidding invited in the form of joint ventures. This was exactly the kind of project that Luis's real estate company was targeting, not as the general contractor, but as a key partner in urban development segments. I read the news in my private office with a steaming cup of coffee in front of me. Luis had mentioned this project at the Christmas party, calling it a make-or-break opportunity for a breakthrough. With his existing reputation and media support, I knew his company would not miss it. They would dive into this race with everything they had. But they didn't know that my investment conglomerate controlled a series of subsidiaries operating precisely in this field. We had been investing in green technology and sustainable infrastructure for years, with underground projects in Europe and the United States. My heart beat faster as I read the project details. This was no coincidence. It was an opportunity. I realized this was the perfect moment to step into the light, not with long explanations, but with real capability. No need to declare how wealthy or successful I was. I wanted the results to speak for themselves. I immediately called my team and instructed them to prepare the bidding documents. We would participate through Green Tech Solutions, a subsidiary that operated independently but under my strategic control. On paper, it was just a company specializing in green technology infrastructure. No one knew I was behind it, at least not until now. The following weeks were a whirlwind. I plunged into work, overseeing every detail. The bidding proposal was prepared meticulously, not in the flashy style of Luis, but focused on long-term strategy. Sustainability with renewable energy, risk control through predictive AI, and community benefits. Meetings stretched late into the night, one after another, involving engineers, lawyers, and financial experts. I demanded that everything be reviewed down to the last detail. Our proposal had to compete not only on cost, but also excel in long-term vision and practical implementation capability. In my mind, images of Luis flashed by as the truth gradually emerged, stunned perhaps, but certainly not just surprised. There would be worry, and then I wondered, how would my parents react? Would they finally see my true ability, or would they still find ways to rationalize everything and continue siding with him? The bidding day arrived faster than I expected. It was a chilly March morning at the government building in central London. I drove there alone, wearing a simple dark suit, no cravat, just a leather briefcase containing the documents. My heart pounded as I parked, watching the flow of people coming and going. Businessmen with tense faces, reporters lingering outside the gate. I knew Luis would be there with his large team and sky-high confidence. He believed that his company's reputation combined with media backing would give him an absolute advantage. I had heard him boast. This project was made for us. The bidding room was spacious, with a long conference table and brightly lit projection screens. The atmosphere was tense from the very first minute, highly competitive. Representatives from the bidding companies appeared one by one. A German company with high-tech proposals, a local conglomerate emphasizing low costs. Everyone sat around the table, taking notes and whispering. The project panel, consisting of government officials and independent experts, sat at the head of the table, their expressions serious. I sat in a corner, waiting my turn, my heart pounding like a drum. Then it was Luis's company's turn. He entered with a radiant smile, followed by assistants and lawyers. "Dear panel members, Kensington Realty is proud to present our proposal," Luis began, his voice resounding and full of confidence. He presented smoothly, emphasizing reputation, previous contracts, and how the media would promote the project. The guests, including my parents, invited as related shareholders and honorary guests, sat in the observation seats, nodding proudly. I observed from afar, seeing my father clap lightly when Luis finished his introduction. My mother smiled, her eyes sparkling. They had no idea I was there. I had registered under the subsidiary's name and requested that the representative's identity not be revealed until the last minute. Excitement surged through me like an electric current running down my spine. How would they react? Shock or denial? Then it was our turn. Next, the representative from Green Tech Solutions, the panel chair announced. I stood up and entered the room as the supreme representative. The door opened, and I clearly saw the change on everyone's faces. Luis was sitting there, sipping water, when he suddenly froze. I saw his eyes widen the moment he recognized me. The hand holding the glass stopped midway in the air, tilted, then froze completely, as if all reflexes had been interrupted. The familiar confidence on his face vanished in an instant, replaced by an emptiness he couldn't hide. The project panel members looked at each other, sensing the unusual relationship between us. Some whispered to those beside them, their eyes quickly darting between me and him. I remained calm, walked to my position, and nodded in greeting to the panel. My parents, sitting in the back row, could not hide their astonishment. My father's mouth fell open. My mother covered hers with her hand, eyes wide in shock. They had never imagined me in this position, a representative for a major bidder directly competing against Luis. I could sense the chaos in their minds. How is this possible? Lorenzo just does service jobs? But I didn't look at them. I focused on the task. I maintained a calm, professional demeanor, presenting the proposal concisely, logically, and persuasively. Dear panel members, Green Tech Solutions proposes a sustainable model with a focus on AI technology for risk control and energy optimization. We commit to reducing carbon emissions by 30% within 5 years, while ensuring long-term profits for the government. I projected slides explaining each step, from financial planning to international partnerships. My voice was steady, but inside my heart was pounding. This was the moment, the truth emerging without words. The panel began asking technical questions. How will you handle risks from climate change? I answered fluently, demonstrating deep understanding and real experience from previous projects. We have applied a similar model in Berlin, reducing risks by 25% through real-time data. The questions came rapidly, and I handled each one coherently, with specific evidence and clear data. Meanwhile, Luis began to lose his composure. I saw him fidgeting in his seat, his face flushed, scribbling frantically but with trembling hands. He realized his advantage was shrinking right in front of his family and partners. His proposal suddenly seemed weak, too focused on reputation, lacking technical depth. One panel member turned to him. Compared to green tech, how will your company implement sustainability? Luis stammered in response, trying to justify, but his voice lacked confidence, no longer as assured as at the beginning. The bidding session lasted 2 hours, but to me it felt like a slow-motion action movie. With each minute, the tension escalated. I could feel my parents' eyes fixed on me, full of confusion and shock. Luis looked at me as if I were an enemy, no longer the failed little brother. At the end of the meeting, the panel thanked everyone, but a heavy atmosphere lingered. The truth about my identity didn't need declaration, but was already crystal clear. I was not incompetent. I was a real competitor. I left the meeting room first without looking at anyone. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw my parents stand up and leave the room in silence, their faces pale. They said nothing, just held hands and walked into the hallway. Luis remained seated, facing a competitor he had never considered an equal. He stared at me, eyes full of anger and confusion. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from anticipation for what was to come. This project was only the beginning. My family was about to face the truth, and I would not back down. The days following the bidding session passed in a storm of emotions. I returned to my office and buried myself in work to forget their gazes. My phone buzzed incessantly, messages from my assistant updating progress, emails from the project panel praising our proposal, but not a single call from my family. I knew they were digesting the truth, and I waited. Not for an apology, but to see how they would react. It was thrilling, yes, like standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether the wind would lift me up or pull me down. Then the call came, on a rainy evening. My father phoned, his voice low and deep, lacking the pride it had held at the Christmas party. "Lorenzo, come home tomorrow. The whole family will be there. We have some things to clarify. I agreed without asking more. My heart raced as I hung up. This was it, the private family meeting where everything would be laid bare. I lay awake all night thinking about what was to come. Would they acknowledge me or try to pull me back into my old position? The next morning I drove to the Kensington villa. The familiar road felt heavier than ever. The snow had melted, replaced by a drizzle that made everything damp and gloomy. I stepped inside. The smell of coffee and toasted bread wafted from the kitchen. The scent of family mornings, but today it held no warmth. My parents sat in the living room, their faces stern. Luis was already there, sitting on the sofa, holding a glass of water, looking like a wronged victim. The atmosphere was tense from the start, not the initial surprise from the bidding session, but rather an air of scrutiny and control, as if I were a criminal being interrogated. I sat down facing them. My father spoke first, his voice cold. "Lorenzo, explain yourself. What's going on? You're the chairman of that green tech company. Why did you hide it from us?" My mother nodded, her eyes red. "That's right, son. Why did you conceal your identity? That's disrespectful to the family. We're your parents. We should have known." Not a word of congratulations, not a question about my journey. They focused on questioning me as if my success were a crime. My heart tightened, excitement mixed with disappointment. What had I expected? A proud embrace? No, they were still the same. Luis interjected, his voice shrill and full of resentment. "Little brother, you did this on purpose, didn't you? You knew how important that project was to me, yet you dared to compete against me. Do you want to humiliate me in front of partners and our parents? Is this revenge for the Christmas party?" He played the perfect victim, his eyes glaring as if I were the betrayer. I looked at him, remembering his smug gaze when he had humiliated me in front of everyone. And now, he was trembling, not with regret but with anger at being threatened. My parents quickly sided with Luis as if it were a reflex honed over the years. My father patted my brother's shoulder. "Luis is right. Brothers competing against each other is wrong. It goes against family values. Lorenzo, what were you thinking? The family must stay united." My mother burst into tears. "Son, we raised you all these years not for you to treat the family like this today. Yield to your brother. It's just between family." I sat there listening silently, my heart pounding. In that moment, I understood a familiar but bitter truth. No matter how successful I became, my parents' first instinct was always to protect their favored son. Luis would forever be the center. And I had never been more than a supporting role that could be pushed aside when needed. The conversation pulled me back to the past, where everything was always weighed on a scale so naturally, as if it were obvious. I grew up under those comparisons. No one ever said outright that I was inferior, but there was always a standard named Luis right beside me. I clearly remember when I was 10 years old, both brothers entered a school drawing contest. I drew our family, parents, brother, and me, sitting around the dinner table. I spent hours coloring every detail, afraid of leaving out a face, afraid of upsetting anyone. Luis drew a ship with quick strokes and some smudged colors. When the results were announced, the teacher said Luis's painting showed creative ideas and boldness. Mine was on topic, but nothing special. Luis won the prize. On the way home, my parents kept talking about his creativity. I was comforted with the familiar line, "It's okay, son. Try harder next time." My small mistakes were always magnified, like in 8th grade when I failed math once. It was brought up repeatedly for weeks. My parents scolded me for being lazy, for not trying hard enough, using it as an example whenever they needed to remind me of my inadequacy. Meanwhile, Luis's mistakes always found a way to be overlooked. Once he drove my father's car after drinking and got into a minor accident, but no one made a big deal of it. My parents just sighed and brushed it off, saying he was young and just needed to be more careful next time. That difference was present even in the smallest things. If I broke a glass, I was scolded for being clumsy and careless. Luis, even when causing much bigger issues, always had an excuse for forgiveness. Gradually, I realized the problem wasn't about right or wrong, but about who was protected. I remembered the moment I left home to become independent at age 25. It was after a major argument. Luis had just received a $2 million investment from my parents for his real estate company, complete with family connections and prestige. And me? I proposed a startup investment idea, but my parents laughed it off. "You're not talented enough to do something like that." I left with $5,000, accepting no support. In those first nights in a cramped rented apartment, I stayed up planning, calling investors, failing over and over. Once, when my first startup went bankrupt, I nearly took my own life in despair. But I got back up, learned, and built my empire step by step. Meanwhile, Luis had maximum backing. Capital from my parents, connections from family friends, even cover-ups for his early financial mistakes. He had never truly been independent. Back to the present, my father's voice pulled me back. "We have a solution. Lorenzo, withdraw from the project, yield the contract and implementation rights to Luis's company." My mother nodded vigorously. "Yes, son. For the family, for our shared reputation, and for your brother's future. Luis needs this project to break through. Let him have it." Their words sounded like an order, not a request. The demand grew coercive. "If you don't agree, we'll consider you a family traitor. Do you want to tear the family apart?" My father slammed the table, his eyes bloodshot. I calmly realized this wasn't a proposal, but a disguised ultimatum. My heart pounded hard, excitement making my hands tremble slightly under the table. They didn't ask about my efforts, the sleepless nights, the risks I bore, the successes I built from nothing. They didn't care how hard I had worked. They only cared about preserving the old order. Luis at the top, me in his shadow. For the family? Those words echoed, but they were just a veneer for favoritism. I looked at them, keeping my voice calm. "Mom, Dad, I respect the family, but this is a project I've invested a lot of time and effort into. I need more time to think before deciding." Luis didn't react as sharply as before. He just leaned back in his chair, silent, his eyes unable to hide his discomfort. My parents looked at me, both disappointed and expectant, as if convinced I would change my mind given more time. No one said anything else. I stood up and left, my heart beating faster than usual. I knew they were waiting for my answer, and I also knew that once that answer was given, nothing could ever go back to the way it was. The conversation ended, but inside me, everything became clearer than ever. For the first time, I saw myself facing an unavoidable choice. Continue stepping back, continue staying silent to preserve what was called family, or step forward and defend the value I had built with my own hands over the years. I understood that if I yielded again this time, I would forever remain the familiar shadow behind my brother. And for the first time, I realized I no longer wanted to live that way. On the drive home after that tense family meeting, rain still pattered against the windshield, as if the heavens were weeping in place of what had just transpired. I didn't rush into any decision, not acting out of the anger boiling in my chest. Instead, I took time to think carefully, sitting alone in my dimly lit apartment, staring out the window where the hazy streetlights filtered through. I reviewed the entire journey I had traveled, like flipping through a dusty old notebook. From the 10-year-old boy constantly compared to his brother to the 25-year-old man who left home with a light suitcase and a heavy heart. The sleepless nights in a cheap rented apartment where I taught myself programming and market analysis without a single piece of advice from my parents. The humiliating failures, the first startup that went bankrupt, losing all my capital. I once sat on the floor crying alone, thinking I truly was incompetent, as they had said. But then I stood up, learned from my mistakes, and built my investment empire brick by brick. $350 million. That figure didn't fall from the sky. It came from sweat, tears, and solitary decisions. Now, this bidding project was proof of it all. Yielding wouldn't just mean giving up a contract. It would mean accepting the role of a lifelong shadow, allowing my parents to continue their favoritism, letting Luis continue to lord over me. No, I couldn't do that. My heart pounded as I thought about the consequences, excited, anxious, but also filled with determination. This was the moment I had to choose myself. After 3 sleepless days, I made a firm decision. I would not withdraw from the project, not transfer the contract, and not sacrifice my business principles due to family pressure. It wasn't selfishness. It was fairness to myself. I had waited too long for recognition, and now I realized that true recognition must come from within, not from anyone else. I called my parents, my voice calm. I want to meet you both alone to clearly state my decision. They agreed, but my father's voice over the phone sounded heavy, as if he sensed something unpleasant was coming. The meeting took place on a Saturday afternoon at the family villa, the same place where just a few months earlier I had been relegated to a hidden corner during the Christmas party. I walked in wearing a simple shirt, holding a cup of coffee I had brewed myself at home. My parents sat on the sofa, their faces stern, not with the scrutiny of the previous time, but with a ready defensive shell. I sat down, looking them straight in the eyes, maintaining a calm and respectful demeanor. Mom, Dad, I've thought carefully about what we discussed. I respect the family and I know this project is important to Luis, but I cannot withdraw or yield the contract. This is the result of years of my own hard work, and I cannot sacrifice my business principles just for family ties. My words came out gently, but inside my heart was pounding like a drum. I waited for their reaction, excitement making my fingers grip the armrest tightly. The room fell silent for a few brief seconds, then, like a string pulled too tight, everything exploded. My father stood up abruptly, his face flushed red, his voice sharp. Lorenzo, you're being too selfish. You're putting your personal interests above family bonds. How did we raise you that you're now turning your back on your brother like this? Before I could open my mouth, my mother burst into tears, her voice trembling with reproach. Son, how can you do this to the family? It's just one project. Yield to your brother. For us. For the family. Do you want to see the whole family fall apart? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom, Dad, I never wanted to confront anyone, but I built everything from nothing. I didn't take a single penny from the family. This project is the result of years of my own efforts. I just want to protect what I've created. My father shook his head repeatedly, interrupting me. Stop making excuses. You need to be reasonable. Your brother needs this opportunity. Yield to Luis. That's what's best for the family. I'm not disregarding the family. I tried to continue, my voice starting to hoarse. But why is it always me who has to sacrifice? My mother repeated, almost pleading. Don't calculate like that. Among family, who's better than whom? We just want everything to stay peaceful. Yielding one step won't cost you anything. The words I spoke seemed to slide right past them, touching no one. They weren't listening to my reasons, didn't care about my journey. They just repeated one single demand as if everything had been predetermined from the start. My heart ached, not from anger, but because I finally understood. In this story, they had never truly wanted to hear me. In their eyes, there was only Luis, only the old order that needed protecting, and I was still just the one expected to step aside. Then Luis appeared, almost on cue, as if it had been arranged beforehand. He entered from the back door, his face pale, breathing heavily, carrying the demeanor of someone backed into a corner. Little brother, do you really want to take it this far? He said, his voice trembling but loud enough to fill the room. You know this project is make or break for me. Without it, my company will collapse. Yet you're still insisting on keeping it. You're single-handedly tearing this family apart. Before I could respond, my parents turned to him. My mother quickly pulled Luis close, her voice choked. Stop, son. We understand. You've suffered enough. Luis seemed energized by it. He took a deep breath, his voice rising with resentment. From childhood to now, I've yielded to Lorenzo so many times. I've always been the one carrying the responsibility while he always did whatever he wanted. Now, when I need it, he turns his back. Mom, Dad, think about it. How can I bear this? My father frowned deeply, turning fully toward me. Lorenzo, did you hear what your brother said? Do you realize what you're causing? I tried to stay calm. Mom, Dad, I don't want to hurt anyone. But I can't abandon what I've built just because of this pressure. I'm not taking from Luis, I'm only protecting my own share. My own share? Luis sneered. In this family, nothing is truly individual. Everything is shared. Or have you never considered this a family from the start? My mother sobbed, hugging Luis tightly as if afraid he would collapse. Son, don't say that. We won't let this happen. We won't let Lorenzo destroy the family. The atmosphere in the living room grew thick and oppressive. I stood there feeling as if I were on trial. No one asked what I truly wanted. No one listened to my journey. Every gaze was directed at Luis, the one to be protected, the one who needed saving. Finally, my father spoke, his voice lowering to a chilling coldness. Lorenzo, I'll say it clearly once. If you don't yield, we will consider you no longer our son. Choose your family or that damned project. Those words cut straight into my chest. I looked at them, at each familiar face, and for the first time recognized an undeniable truth. This wasn't a momentary outburst of anger, but a deliberate choice. They were willing to disown me to protect Luis, to preserve the old order they believed was right. My heart pounded hard, both in pain and coldness. But I didn't beg, nor did I back down. I spoke, my voice strangely calm. I understand. I accept my decision. I stood up, walked to the door, and didn't look back. Outside, the rain was still falling heavily, cold and persistent, just like the feeling gradually spreading inside me. From then on, my parents cut off all contact completely. No calls, no messages, no attendance at any events related to me. My birthday passed in silence, not a single wish. I was officially excluded from the family, both emotionally and nominally. They removed my name from the inheritance list and stopped inviting me to family gatherings. Though it was painful, like a deep wound in my heart, I had no regrets. For the first time in my life, I had protected myself. In those first nights, I lay awake, remembering childhood memories, family dinners, summer vacations, now just distant recollections. But that pain gradually turned into strength. The isolation from my family became the motivation that drove me to focus entirely on the project and my work. I met with my team daily, refined the proposal, and tracked progress. The subsidiary GreenTech grew strongly, with international partners flocking in. I stood alone on my apartment balcony, looking out over the glittering city of London under the night lights. The cold wind blew past, carrying the lingering scent of rain. I no longer sought recognition from my parents. Only the path ahead, chosen by myself, remained. My heart beat steadily, excited for the challenges to come, but this time I was ready to face them alone. In the first weeks after being disowned, my life flowed into a new rhythm, isolated but focused. I poured all my energy into the project, holding endless meetings with my team in the discreet office in the city center. There were no more calls from my parents, no more fake concerned messages. Instead, there was a heavy silence, like an invisible wall. I knew Luis wouldn't sit still. My firm refusal to yield the project was too great an insult to him, not just in the business world, but in his role as the older brother who had always been accustomed to standing above me. From childhood, he had been used to favoritism, to being the center, to looking down on me. And now, that order had been overturned. I could clearly picture his face at that moment, flushed red with anger, eyes tense every time he thought about the bidding session. Luis would find a way to retaliate. I had no doubt about that. The feeling of excitement was still there, like standing before a gathering storm. But this time I was no longer passive. I was prepared. The first sign came on a Monday morning when my assistant rushed into the office, face pale. Boss, a major partner just canceled our meeting. They said they need to review the contract. I frowned and checked my email. It wasn't just one. 3 partners, essential suppliers for the smart infrastructure project, suddenly paused cooperation. The reasons were vague, resolving internal issues. My heart raced, excitement surging. This was no coincidence. Luis had begun using his industry connections to pressure partners and suppliers working with my conglomerate. He had a wide network, from university friends to officials in the real estate world. I had heard him boast about them at the Christmas party. Now they had become weapons aimed at me. One partner confessed over the phone, voice whispering, "Luis called us saying that working with you could be risky. We don't want to get involved." I gripped the phone tightly, feeling blood rush to my head. Dramatic, yes, like a spy movie, but this was real life and I was the target. It didn't stop there. A discreet smear campaign was launched, spreading rumors that my investment conglomerate lacked transparency and was just a financial shell. I read them on underground business forums, anonymous posts. Green Tech Solutions? Rumor has it it's a shell company hiding dirty money. Then came the press, a small article in a local financial newspaper citing internal sources claiming we were under investigation. My heart tightened as I read those lines. I didn't need to guess long to know who was behind it. Luis, for sure. He had always known how to manipulate the media, using it to elevate himself before and now turning it against me. The consequences came quickly. A few partners temporarily froze cooperation, causing delays in the project right from the early stages. The installation of test equipment was postponed, and questions began arising from the project panel. Is there any issue? I immediately convened an emergency meeting with the team. My voice remained calm, even though a storm raged inside. We have to get through this. Review every process. There must be no further mistakes. The surrounding pressure caused me to lose sleep. I lay awake all night, my mind constantly revolving around the next moves, knowing this was only the opening salvo. Then the climax arrived. Luis found ways to approach regulatory agencies, subtly reporting financial irregularities to drag my conglomerate into prolonged audits. I received a letter from the U.S. Financial Authority notifying me of a surprise inspection. Suspicions of non-transparent activities, the letter stated. My heart pounded as I opened the envelope. This was a lethal blow. If prolonged, the project could die young and my reputation would be shattered. I quickly realized the chain of events was not random, but a deliberate plan aimed straight at me. Luis was playing dirty, using every trick to bring me down, to prove he was still superior. I pictured him sitting in his office, smirking triumphantly as he made calls to his connections. Painful, yes, because this was my brother, but now he felt like an enemy. The excitement rose high. Could I overcome this? Instead of retaliating emotionally, I stayed calm. I instructed the legal and audit teams to review all operations, proactively making every document transparent. Check every number, every transaction, I directed in the meeting. We worked through the night, printing stacks of documents with independent auditors confirming everything. I allowed the authorities full access, ready to cooperate to prove our innocence. We are completely open, I told the inspectors when they arrived at the office. It was a tense week. They pored over the books, interviewed staff, checked accounts. My heart pounded every time I received a report. They asked about last year's transaction. It was thrilling, like walking a tightrope. One small mistake could cause everything to collapse. But I knew I was clean. Everything was legal, built from zero. The inspections concluded with no violations found on my conglomerate's side. The lead inspector officially announced, "Everything is clear, no issues." I breathed a sigh of relief but didn't smile. On the contrary, during the document review process, some irregularities from Luis's company began to draw attention. They found suspicious transactions, transfers of unclear origin, likely from his connections. I received news from my lawyer. They're shifting the files to the other side. My heart beat faster. Dramatic, yes, like an unexpected twist. Luis had dug his own grave. But I restrained myself, not rushing to exploit those weaknesses. I didn't want to play his way. Instead, I poured all my focus into the project. We must not get distracted, I told the team. Work accelerated again. The AI test systems were installed on schedule, and we soon reached the first major milestone. The prototype model recorded a 15% reduction in energy consumption. My project achieved key milestones, receiving positive evaluations from the panel and international partners. An email from the panel. GreenTech's proposal excels in sustainability. Partners returned, apologizing for the misunderstanding. The reputation of my discreet investment conglomerate was strongly reinforced, while Luis's tactics gradually backfired. Sometime later, everything began to collapse like a dilapidated building toppled by a storm. It was on an early summer morning as I sat in my office sipping a bitterly strong black coffee when my phone vibrated with a news app notification. The media was abuzz with reports of irregularities in Luis's company operations. Headlines screamed across the front pages. Kensington Realty implicated in financial fraud scandal, or shady dealings behind the real estate empire. My heart pounded as I read them. Not out of glee. I'm not the kind of petty person who delights in seeing others fall, but out of excitement, as if a time bomb I had long sensed was finally detonating. Regulatory authorities stepped in following cross-industry audits. Initially, those inspections had targeted me as a chain reaction from what Luis had sown. But the deeper they dug, the more the investigation shifted direction. Familiar traces began to emerge, and this time, they led straight to him. Transactions once shielded by connections and reputation could no longer hold. Layer by layer, they were peeled away. Opaque funds transferred offshore, falsified invoices, cleverly disguised tax evasion tactics. All of it, things that had previously languished in the shadows, was now placed directly under daylight with no room left for denial. I sat there scrolling through the articles, my feelings mixed. Part of me ached because he was my brother. Another part felt it was justice. Luis had played dirty, and now the consequences had arrived. I recalled that last phone call, his voice trembling with panic. He had never imagined he could fail, having been shielded by our parents from everything since childhood. But now the truth spared no one. A formal investigation was launched, focusing on serious financial fraud and violations of business regulations. I followed it from afar, through the press and updates from my lawyer. They delved deep into Kensington Realty's books, uncovering vulnerabilities Luis had thought were secure. My heart raced faster with each new development, exciting and dramatic like watching a crime thriller, except the protagonist was my own flesh and blood. Then that moment arrived. An official summons was issued. The truth was no longer within Luis's control. He was called to the investigation office, and the media abruptly changed its tune. Articles that had once praised my brother now collectively questioned his business ethics. From star to suspect, the story of Luis Kensington, that headline spread everywhere. Reporters swarmed the villa, partners severed ties, and the company's stock plummeted uncontrollably. Luis was indicted on multiple charges related to illegal business activities, financial fraud, money laundering, antitrust violations. He faced the risk of losing everything: his company, his reputation, even his freedom. The family was forced to confront reality when a public trial date was set. That day was marked on the calendar like a full stop to the old illusions. I thought carefully before deciding. My parents called me for the first time after months of silence, their voices trembling. "Lorenzo, will you come to the trial?" "For Luis." I paused for a few seconds, my heart pounding. Not from anger, but from anticipation of the confrontation. Finally, I agreed. "I'll come, with you both." Not to witness Luis's downfall, but to close a chapter that had never been faced head-on. The chapter about favoritism, about silent wounds, about the family I had once hoped for. I knew the trial would be the turning point, where everything would be exposed with no more places to hide. The trial day arrived on a gray morning in central London. I drove to the courthouse, my parents sitting in the back, silent as ghosts. No one spoke on the way. only the crackling radio reporting on the case. The courthouse was packed. Reporters, former partners, even a few family friends. We sat in the relatives section, my father clutching my mother's hand tightly, his face pale. In the courtroom, Luis no longer looked like the successful businessman in a shiny suit, but a defendant facing the law. He sat there in a pale white shirt, hair disheveled, eyes ringed with dark circles. When our gazes met, he lowered his head as if ashamed. My heart pounded, excited, painful, yet strangely peaceful. The trial began, and for the first time my parents witnessed the full evidence presented in court. The prosecutor listed each transaction. The defendant transferred $5 million through offshore accounts to evade taxes, using fake invoices to inflate profits. Evidence piled up: emails, meeting minutes, bank records. There was no way to deny or justify it. My father gripped the armrest tightly. My mother covered her mouth, tears streaming down. A heavy silence enveloped the room as acts once shielded under the family name were now exposed to the public. The times my parents had used connections to clean up Luis's messes, the mistakes that had been overlooked. All of it now became evidence turning against him. With each piece presented, I clearly sensed the change in my parents. No more defenses, no more familiar headshakes to deny reality. Their silence was heavier than any reproach. For the first time, I saw them confronting the cost of years of favoritism and protection, not just Luis's mistakes, but the consequences of choices they had repeated for far too long. I sat there, maintaining the necessary distance, not interfering, not intervening, simply quietly respecting the legal process unfolding before us. The trial lasted 3 days, each day peeling away another layer. My parents grew increasingly silent, no longer defending Luis as before. We were wrong for a very long time. We shouldn't have let things go this far, my father whispered to my mother during a break, his voice breaking. My mother nodded, eyes red. He's still our son, but I never imagined it would come to this. Hearing it pained my heart. The trial became a moment of awakening, not just for Luis, but for the entire family. The verdict was delivered on the final day. Luis was sentenced to 5 years in prison for financial fraud, along with an enormous fine. He stood there, head bowed, as the jury read the guilty verdict. The courtroom fell dead silent, broken only by my mother's sobbing. That was the moment marking Luis's complete collapse in the business world, while simultaneously opening a painful void in our family. I stood there, realizing that some things, once broken, could never return to how they were. The story did not end with retribution, but with a stark truth that all of us were forced to accept. On the drive home, my parents said nothing, just holding hands. I drove, my heart heavy, excited for the future, what would become of the family. But I knew this was the end of an old chapter and the beginning of truth. After the trial, Luis was officially incarcerated, separated from the business world he had once ruled like a king. He was taken to a prison on the outskirts of London, where expensive suits and glamorous meetings were now distant memories. I heard the news from the press, images of my brother in handcuffs, head bowed low as he left the courthouse. My heart pounded, not out of pity, but from anticipation of what was to come. The family now felt like a ship adrift in a storm, and I knew that void would not be easily filled. My parents, who had once taken pride in Luis as if he were a treasure, now sank into confusion and guilt. They called me a few days later. My father's voice over the phone sounded weary and remorseful. "Lorenzo, we should go visit Luis. Will you come with us?" I paused for a moment, feeling a jolt run down my spine. Visiting my brother in prison, something I had never imagined. But I agreed, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to close a chapter. To look him straight in the eyes and see if there was any sign of realization. My parents decided to go with me to visit Luis at the prison. It was a chilly late autumn morning, with golden leaves falling scattered along the road leading there. We drove in silence, only the crackling radio reporting on economic crimes. My father gripped the steering wheel tightly, his face more gaunt than ever, while my mother sat in the back clutching her handkerchief, eyes red and swollen. The cold, confined visiting area created a stark contrast to Luis's once glamorous image. The prison was a gray building with towering walls and barbed wire fences glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. We had to go through security checks, removing shoes, leaving belongings, and waiting in a dimly lit waiting room filled with the musty smell mixed with the whispers of other families. My heart pounded, excitement making my hands tremble slightly as I signed the register. What would Luis be like? Remorseful or still arrogant? The drama surged within me like standing before a door leading to the past. Then the door opened, and we were led into the visiting room. It was a cramped space with an old wooden table and a glass partition in between. Luis appeared from the other side, looking worn down but with eyes still full of pride and resentment. He had visibly lost weight. His once neatly combed hair was now disheveled, and the gray prison uniform clung to his formerly muscular frame. He sat down, looking at us through the glass, forcing a smile. "Mom, Dad, little brother, thank you for coming." His voice was hoarse, yet it still carried that familiar air of superiority. My mother burst into tears immediately, pressing her hand against the glass. "Luis, how did you end up like this?" My father remained silent, eyes red, tightly holding my mother's hand. I sat there observing, my heart pounding. This was not the Luis from the Christmas party, but his eyes were the same, full of resentment, as if the world owed him something. The meeting quickly revealed the truth. Luis did not admit any wrongdoing. In his view, the sentence was merely the result of bad luck and external forces. He leaned back in his chair, voice full of grievance. "Actually, it wasn't that serious. Those transactions. Everyone in the industry does the same. I was just unlucky running into overly meticulous inspectors. And for sure, someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. Those competitors." He paused, looking straight at me, his eyes flashing with bitterness. "You know it, don't you? If you had yielded the project back then, things wouldn't have gone this far. If you had just been reasonable, I wouldn't be sitting here." My heart tightened, a mix of excitement and anger surging. I realized that in his mind, I was still the cause of it all. Not a word of apology, not a trace of regret for the dirty tricks he had used. "Don't you see the problem lies in what you did yourself?" I asked, my voice low but clear. "Whether you got the project or not, those shady things still existed." Luis let out a soft, sarcastic laugh. "You always talk about morals. But life isn't that simple. Is anyone completely clean? I just did what was necessary to survive." Then he turned to our parents, his voice shifting to the familiar, almost default tone. "Mom, Dad, you'll help me, right? Our family has strong connections. It can be sorted out. At worst, a few years, and I'll be out again." My mother remained silent, unresponsive. My father avoided his gaze, but Luis seemed not to notice. He flashed a condescending smile, as if he were still sitting in a luxurious office rather than this cold visiting room. In that moment, I understood that what trapped Luis was not just the iron bars, but his stubborn belief that he had never been wrong, and that the world was obligated to revolve around him. My parents listened in silence for the first time, not rushing to defend or make excuses for Luis. My father bowed his head. My mother wiped her tears but said nothing. There were no more phrases like "Luis did the right thing" or "our son has been wronged." They sat there as if seeing his true character clearly for the first time. I realized my brother's stubbornness did not stem from his current circumstances, but had been nurtured over years of being shielded and indulged blindly. From childhood, Luis had always been forgiven. Cheating on exams, drunk driving accidents, even his early business mistakes had all been covered up by our parents. They always said it was for the family, but in reality they were raising a selfish monster. Now sitting in prison, he remained the same. No awakening, only resentment piled high. My heart raced, not from fear, but from anticipation of the moment I had to say things that had never been said. I didn't argue or try to convince him. I simply maintained my calm and clear boundaries. "Brother, what's done is done," I said, my voice gentle and steady. "Perhaps you should take the time to think about what you've done." Luis sneered and leaned back in his chair. "Sounds like you're lecturing me. Easy to say when you're the one walking away with everything." "I didn't come here to win or lose," I replied, "nor to claim credit or dredge up the past. I just want you to understand that this wasn't caused by me." Luis shook his head, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Win or lose? Out there, do you think you're so clean? The business world has no place for innocence. I was just unlucky, while you're better at hiding things." I looked at him without flinching. "You always think the problem lies in the outcome, not the choices. But it's exactly that way of seeing things that brought you here." Luis fell silent for a few seconds, then let out a dry laugh. "You say it so nicely. But without this family, without what Mom and Dad built, who do you think you are?" "Maybe I'd be no one," I said. "But what I have, I take responsibility for myself." Luis turned his face away, his voice lowering but still bitter. "You'll see. Out there, no one's any better." Behind the glass, Luis remained seated, not imprisoned by bars alone, but by his rigid belief that he had never been wrong. The door closed between us, not with noise or drama, but enough for me to understand that some distances don't need to be bridged. They only need to be acknowledged as existing. I understood that this collapse was not enough to make Luis realize anything immediately. He still lived in delusion, still saw himself as the victim. The visit ended in a heavy atmosphere with no reconciliation, no apology. We stood up. Luis watched us go with resentful eyes. "Mom, Dad, remember, help me get out of here as soon as possible." The door closed behind us with a dry click of the lock, like a reminder that needed no explanation. On the way out of the prison, no one spoke for a long while. Then my father broke the silence very softly, as if speaking to himself. "We were wrong, Eloise. We protected him too much." My mother nodded, her voice breaking with exhaustion and regret. "We're the ones who created such a stubborn Luis." They didn't turn to me or wait for my response, but I heard it clearly. For the first time, they admitted it, not to me, but to a truth they could no longer avoid. I accepted a painful reality. Some lessons cannot be learned for others, and some people only change when they truly hit rock bottom. Luis wasn't there yet. He still believed someone would pull him up, still waited for a familiar hand to reach out. And that very hope was the greatest prison he was trapped in. The visit ended with a clear sense of incompleteness. My family was still not healed, and I didn't expect it to happen soon. But this silence was no longer avoidance or imposition as before. It carried a different meaning, a belated awakening when all excuses had run dry and each person was left alone with their own responsibility. On the drive home, rain began to fall and I drove in silence, my heart still pounding. Excited for the future, would Luis change? Would my parents see me differently? But now, I only knew that the story was not yet over. In the months following Luis's imprisonment, my life entered a new phase, quieter than ever before. No more sleepless nights worrying about family matters. No more sudden calls from my parents. No more resentful messages from Luis. Instead, there were gentle dawn mornings when I woke up at 6 a.m., brewed a cup of black coffee, and sat at my desk overlooking the city of London as it awakened. My investment conglomerate was thriving. The smart infrastructure project had officially won the bid, and international partners were flocking in like bees to a hive. I focused on work, building new relationships with people who truly valued me for my abilities, not because of family ties. Late-night meetings, business trips to Berlin or New York, all of it kept me busy but fulfilled. I no longer tried to prove anything to my family. I didn't need to anymore. The recognition from my parents, something I had once craved, now felt like a faint memory. I had learned to recognize myself through the growing numbers in financial reports, through handshakes from partners, and through the inner peace when reflecting on the path I had walked. Meanwhile, I could imagine my parents' home becoming noticeably emptier. No more boasting about Luis's achievements. No more calls from partners congratulating my brother. The Kensington villa, once filled with laughter and fine wine, was probably now silent like an old museum. My father, Mr. Maxwell, perhaps sat alone in his study, gazing at the wilting garden, holding a newspaper he wasn't reading. My mother, Mrs. Eloise, perhaps busied herself with trivial household tasks, but with eyes always distant. They were beginning to face the reality that the son in whom they had placed all their hopes was no longer there to cover up every mistake. Luis, their greatest pride, was now in prison, and that void could not be filled by any excuses. I pictured my father sitting by the window, glass of wine in hand, eyes heavy in silence. Without words, I could still clearly see the moment they looked back at themselves. They realized that for years they had always demanded that I sacrifice for the family, yield, stay silent to maintain appearances, but never once sacrifice their own favoritism for me. The demands that I yield the project, the cold words of disownment, all of it stemmed not from fairness but from fear of disrupting the old order where Luis was always protected. Now with Luis in prison, they began to reflect on how they had shielded him, and how that shielding had inadvertently nurtured a stubbornness that led to tragedy. From small mistakes in childhood to serious violations later, each cover-up had been a brick contributing to the person he had become. For the first time in that silence, they no longer sought reasons to justify themselves. They were forced to acknowledge their role in the current collapse, not through words, but through the heavy emptiness left behind. The change came very slowly, almost silently. My parents began reaching out to me proactively without the familiar demands or impositions, just cautious inquiries. The first was a message from my mother sent late one evening. "Lorenzo, how have you been lately? I miss you." My heart tightened slightly as I read those words, not from emotion but from a strange excitement after months of silence. I didn't reply immediately, giving myself time to think. Then came a call from my father. He spoke briefly, his voice deeper and shakier than I remembered. "Son, I just wanted to hear your voice. That's all. No more superiority, no more commands." I kept my distance, listening more than responding, because I understood that remorse, if genuine, needed time to be proven through actions, not words. In the end, I only replied, "I'm doing fine. You and Mom should take care of your health too." No more, no less. But even that sentence was enough to stir a quiet excitement in me, wondering if this was real change or just a fleeting moment that would pass as before. The healing didn't happen through one big dramatic conversation like in movies, but through small, patient, undemanding actions. My mother sent me a box of homemade cookies, the kind I loved as a child, with a note, "I made these because I miss you." My father sent an article about my project with the words, "I'm so proud of you, son." No requests to meet, no pressure. They began to listen, for the first time. Once my mother called and asked, "Tell me about your company. I want to know." I told her briefly about the early days of independence, about the failures. She listened silently without interrupting as she used to. My father admitted, "I was wrong, son. I didn't see your efforts." Those moments made my heart race, excited with hope, but also wary because of the past. I set clear boundaries. I was willing to open the door, but I would not return to the role of a shadow as before. When my parents suggested meeting, I agreed, but at a neutral cafe, not the family villa. "I'll come, but we'll talk as adults," I said. The first meeting was tense. My parents sat there, hands trembling around their cups, eyes red. "Son, we were wrong. We favored Luis and overlooked you." Those words from my father left me stunned. My mother cried, "I regret it so much, Lorenzo. I never asked how you were really doing. I was a terrible mother." I listened, my heart pounding. Not immediate forgiveness, but a first step. I told them about my new life, quiet, free, no longer waiting for recognition. "I'm not angry anymore, but I also won't yield anything that belongs to me." They nodded without objection. Excited for future meetings? Would they keep their word? In the days that followed, I continued my work as usual, only now with a new layer of emotion in my heart. During a business trip to Paris, I received a message from my mother. "Travel safely, son. Good luck with the contract." Just a short line, but warm enough. I smiled, for the first time in a long while. Still, I maintained distance, letting everything be tested by time rather than momentary feelings. Old memories sometimes flooded back, the times I was overlooked, the moments standing on the sidelines. But now, they no longer hurt. My parents' change unfolded slowly and quietly. A birthday gift sent on the exact day. Genuine questions about my work and partners. Once my father proactively helped reconnect an old business contact, without any strings attached. I opened the door gradually, little by little, but the boundaries remained clear. I told them and myself that I am Lorenzo, not anyone's shadow. Time passed faster than I had imagined. Before I realized it, the years of Luis's imprisonment had come to an end. It was an early spring morning with pale sunlight filtering through the trees still damp from the previous night's rain. My father called me, his voice deep and heavy. "Lorenzo, Luis is about to be released. Do you want to meet him?" My heart pounded upon hearing that question, not out of fear but from the excitement of knowing a new phase was about to begin. I knew this moment would eventually arrive. Luis was being set free, stepping out of the prison gates in a completely different position. No longer in shiny suits, no longer with a car waiting. He stood there alone, his belongings just an old canvas bag, his face gaunt under the faint sunlight. I wasn't there that day. I pictured the scene from what my father later described. Luis standing and looking around, his eyes lost, as if the outside world had changed too much while he was confined. No company to return to, no reputation to cling to. Kensington Realty had gone bankrupt long ago, assets seized, former partners turning away one by one. Luis had to face a society unwilling to offer him a second chance. Employers shook their heads upon seeing a criminal record. Old friends avoided his calls. He rented a small apartment on the outskirts, living off the meager savings from our parents. And for the first time in his life, he was forced to accept a harsh reality. No one owed him anything. My parents hoped I would extend a helping hand to my brother, but this time they didn't dare impose or demand as before. They had learned their lesson. Blind favoritism had led to tragedy, and now they respected my boundaries. My mother called me separately, her voice cautious. "Lorenzo, Luis is struggling. I'm not forcing you, but if you could, just meet him." My heart raced as I listened, excited because old memories flooded back. The times Luis had humiliated me, the dirty tricks he had played. But I agreed to meet Luis not as a savior, but as someone offering a choice. I didn't want to rescue him from the consequences, but to give him a chance to stand on his own if he truly wanted it. The meeting was arranged at a small cafe in the city center, a place that evoked no memories of past glamour. I arrived early, sitting by the window, watching the drizzle outside, my heart pounding. Would he have changed? Or remained stubborn as during the prison visit? Luis walked in, looking weary but trying to maintain a neat appearance. Clean shirt, hair combed tidily. He sat down across from me, no longer with the arrogance or resentment of before. The meeting unfolded cautiously, like two strangers probing each other. "Thank you for coming, Lorenzo," he said, his voice hoarse, eyes fixed on his coffee cup. "No more condescending you, no more blame." He admitted he had nothing left to lose. Company shattered, reputation gone, friends turned away. I spent 5 years in prison thinking a lot, but I'm still not sure if I've truly changed. I just know I need a chance now. Those words made my heart pound, excited because this was the first time he acknowledged the truth, even if vaguely. Not a direct apology, but a first step. I listened, observing his eyes, still a hint of resentment, but no longer burning with hatred. We talked about small things, weather, our parents' health, before getting to the point. He asked about my work for the first time without envy, just curiosity. "How did you build it? From nothing?" I told him briefly without boasting, and he nodded as if learning. I set clear boundaries from the start, my voice calm but firm. Brother, I'm willing to give you a chance to start over, but within clear limits. No power, no assets, no guarantees. I'm not saving you, I'm just opening the door for you to walk through yourself. My heart raced as I spoke, excited, fearing he might get angry, but he only nodded, eyes lowered. I understand. I have nothing left to demand. That was the dramatic moment. Luis, who had once held the upper hand, now accepting terms from me. The help began with small things. I introduced him to an ordinary job at a small logistics company I knew through a partner, a warehouse worker position suited to his current abilities, no title, no privileges. Not CEO or manager, just manual labor, inventory checking, adhering to schedules. No one gets everything back right away. Start with small things, do them honestly, and then see. The important thing is whether you're willing to begin. He nodded, but I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. His ego still lingered. The early days were extremely difficult for Luis. He had to learn to work under supervision, follow discipline, and take responsibility for every decision. From someone used to giving orders, he now had to obey a boss, a strict middle-aged man who knew nothing of his glamorous past. Luis told me during a later meeting, "On the first day, I almost quit. My hands and feet ached, and the boss scolded me for working slowly." My heart pounded as I listened, excited because I knew this was the real challenge. Luis was constantly tested by his own ego and past. Moments when he wanted to snap at colleagues with, "I used to be the CEO of a renowned company." Nights returning to his cramped apartment exhausted, remembering the old villa. Once he made a mistake, recording the wrong quantity of goods, and had his pay deducted. He called me, voice trembling. "Little brother, I can't take it. Help me." But I didn't intervene, didn't favor him, letting Luis face the consequences of his old choices. "Fix your own mistake," I said calmly. That was a dramatic moment. He fell silent, hung up, and the next day he corrected the error without complaining. Gradually, Luis began to understand that respect doesn't come from position but from how one lives and works. He told me after 3 months, "Today the boss praised me for doing well." For the first time I felt truly proud. My heart raced, excited at seeing the change. He started complying, learning from colleagues, even helping a new employee. No more resentment, just effort. My parents witnessed this slow transformation in silence, for the first time not interfering. They called me. "Luis is trying day by day, son. Thank you for giving him a chance." No demands, just observing from afar. My help wasn't redeeming Luis on his behalf, but an opportunity for him to fix himself. I introduced an online course in warehouse management, but he had to pay for it himself. He did, from his first month's salary. Those small steps accumulated, turning Luis from a stubborn man into an ordinary one, learning to live again. Luis took his first steps on a new path, uncertain but genuine. One evening he called me. "Little brother, I got a small promotion, shift leader. Not CEO, but I'm proud." I smiled over the phone, my heart beating steadily. And I maintained the boundary between compassion and self-respect, helping, but not letting him depend. Excited for the future. Would he sustain it? But now I knew I had made the right decision. Time passed swiftly, and before I realized it, Christmas had come around again. It was 2025, with snow falling lightly outside the window, covering the familiar London streets in a thin layer of white. But this year, everything was different. No more extravagant parties like in the past, no media frenzy, no glamorous guests crowding the family villa. My parents called me a few weeks earlier, their voices cautious. "Lorenzo, for Christmas this year, shall we get together? Just the family." My heart pounded as I listened, excited because old memories flooded back. That party with its humiliations, but also hopeful because of the changes I had sensed. I agreed without hesitation, though a slight anxiety lingered inside. Would things truly be different? Or just a superficial facade? The family gathering was simple, warm and intimate, only those who truly belonged. No towering Christmas tree with thousands of twinkling lights, no endlessly long banquet table laden with caviar and premium French wines. Instead, it was a cozy dinner in the small dining room of the villa with softly scented candles and homemade dishes from my mother. Roast chicken, pudding, and a simple vegetable salad. My father opened the door for me, a genuine smile on his face etched with the lines of time. "Welcome home, son. Come in quickly before you catch a chill." My mother hugged me gently, her eyes glistening. "Lorenzo, how have you been lately?" No more indifference, no more disappointed glances. I stepped inside, sensing the unfamiliar atmosphere, warm but not forced. My heart beat faster, excited because this was the first time we gathered without the shadow of favoritism. I arrived on time, no longer the one forgotten in a corner of the table as in years past, nor the center of attention. My parents welcomed me with genuine respect. They asked about my most recent business trip, listened as I talked about the new project in Berlin, without interrupting or comparing me to anyone. "Hearing that makes me feel reassured about you," my father said, his voice full of pride without exaggeration. My mother nodded. "I know you've had to work hard. No boasting about Luis's achievements, no invoking the past like an invisible knife, the humiliations, the times I was belittled. They kept silent about those things as if understanding that bringing them up would only deepen the wounds." I sat down at the table, feeling a strange balance. I was no longer a shadow, but an equal part. Then Luis arrived, stepping in with a weary but sincere smile. He was now a man starting over. No titles, no privileges, but also no longer looked down upon. He wore a simple shirt, hair cut short and neat, the demeanor of a man who had weathered a storm. He greeted everyone and shook my hand firmly. My parents hugged him, but without the blind indulgence of before, just a warm, equal embrace. Luis sat down and talked about his new job, shift leader in the warehouse, the tiring night shifts but worthwhile. No one was elevated, no one diminished. Each person was seen for who they were now. I talked about the conglomerate, Luis about lessons from prison and his new work, my parents about their days of reflection. The atmosphere wasn't tense but light, like a conversation among truly close people. I realized the biggest difference wasn't in the party, no longer lavish or showy, but in how my parents listened and knew when to stay silent. When Luis mentioned being scolded by his boss for a small mistake, my father didn't jump in to defend him as before, just nodded. "We're glad you fixed it." My mother asked me about new partners, listening attentively without shifting to boast about Luis. They didn't try to atone with grand words, no tearful speeches about regret, but through changes in behavior and boundaries. They respected my space, didn't pressure me to share if I didn't want to, and for the first time, quietly acknowledged their mistakes. From the story of you two brothers, we've learned a lot. My heart pounded as I heard it, excited because this was the moment I had waited for, but also moved because it was genuine. Unlike before, Luis no longer boasted or mocked me. He showed rare humility, a cautious attitude, no longer arrogant. When I mentioned a successful deal, he didn't react with envy or sarcasm, just nodded. "You're really good at this, Lorenzo. I need to learn more from you." Those words left me stunned, the first time he acknowledged me without comparison. He talked about his early days on the job, about learning to apologize to colleagues, about nights reflecting on old mistakes. No more condescending tone, just sincerity. I didn't flaunt my successes or hide my path, only sharing when asked. When my mother asked about my years of independence, I said briefly, "I failed many times, but I learned to stand on my own." They listened, and for the first time, without commentary. This Christmas atmosphere wasn't dazzling like years past. No crystal chandeliers, no gentle violin music, but more authentic and breathable than any before. We exchanged simple gifts. I gave my parents a book on business that I liked. Luis gave a painting he had made in prison. My parents gave us hand-knitted woolen scarves. Laughter rang out naturally in the house, Unforced as we recalled fun childhood stories, silly games of hide-and-seek, noisy summers, without touching any wounds. My heart still raced throughout the evening, not from worry, but from a fragile excitement that one misplaced word could make everything falter. But it didn't happen. No more familiar tension, just a truly warm atmosphere. We dined together, talked late into the night, and for the first time in a long while I realized I was in a safe place. Not because the past had vanished, but because the present was peaceful enough to no longer fear. I realized that family is only truly safe when there is no favoritism or imposition. In years past, Christmas was a stage for comparison, where Luis was the star and I an unwilling spectator. Now everything was balanced. No one pushed to the peak, no one dragged into the depths. Our story closed with a clear lesson. Family bonds cannot exist if built on comparison and control. Those years taught me that family isn't a place for competition, but for unconditional support. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to old roles, being a shadow silently enduring, but choosing to move forward without carrying resentment. I had forgiven my parents, forgiven Luis, but not forgotten the lesson. I walked on with a lighter heart, free of the burden of the past, and a final message to the reader. Sometimes the best way to protect family is to dare to say no, to dare to walk away, and to return only when there is true respect. Don't fear loneliness. It can be the stepping stone to freedom. In my journey, I learned that true family love isn't possession, but letting each other soar high. I, 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 I,